You probably know that toxic algae blooms have become an annual summertime occurrence in western Lake Erie. Measures have been taken to prevent or shrink the blooms, but one factor that fuels them has been growing.
What's become the new normal is severe toxic algae outbreaks in western Lake Erie. That impairs clean water, it harms fisheries, it interferes with tourism and outdoor recreation, and it makes Toledo and Northwest Ohio a much less pleasant place to be. That should not become the new norm. That's not acceptable.
Communities relying on Lake Erie for water, income, and recreation have been battling toxic algal blooms for years. Most notably, in 2014, citizens were told, don't drink the tap water for 3 days. 500,000 people were impacted. These toxic blooms are fueled by nitrogen and phosphorus, intended to feed crops. Both are nutrients which can boost productivity and profitability of farmers' fields. But when those nutrients wash off of fields, they can flow down the Maumee River and into western Lake Erie, feeding explosive growth of toxic cyanobacteria. On the one hand, Northeast Ohio is home to some of the highest agricultural productivity in the country. On the other, western Lake Erie experiences intense algae blooms every summer, fueled by agricultural runoff. The challenge is to prevent cyanobacterial blooms while maintaining agricultural production. Jeff Reuter is the former director of Ohio Sea Grant's Stone Laboratory and helped lead a task force which recommended reducing phosphorus loading in Lake Erie by 40% as part of Annex 4 of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement.
As the amount of phosphorus on a field increases, the amount of phosphorus that runs off from that field also increases. We can look at the load that comes in out of the Maumee River, and over 85% of that is because of agricultural runoff, both fertilizer and manure.
A growing amount of that manure comes from CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. CAFOs can house thousands of animals and, by some estimates, produce as much waste as the cities of Chicago and Los Angeles combined in the Maumee watershed.
That's CAFOs, that's concentrated animal feedlot operations with thousands and thousands of chickens and pigs and cattle. That manure is then spread on fields where it runs off, gets into the tributaries which go into the Maumee River, and then make their way into western Lake Erie.
Environmental Law and Policy Center in Chicago has been studying the impacts of a growing number of factory farms in Ohio. Senior research analyst Lucas Stevens co-authored a report with Environmental Working Group. Their findings indicate that CAFOs are largely unregulated sources of the nutrients which fuel algal blooms.
You can see our estimate of how much manure is being generated at all of the facilities that are in the Maumee River watershed. And we found 775 animal feeding operations, and that's vastly more than are permitted in the state records.
Raj Bhajankawar is a physical scientist at the International Joint Commission. He helped lead the IJC report on reducing phosphorus loading in Lake Erie.
We cannot not have agricultural practices, which is important for this economy and, food production. But same time, we have to be very responsible in terms of how much phosphorus we put it in rivers and lakes. Through the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, 40% reduction on the both dissolved reactive phosphorus and the total phosphorus can reduce these blooms significantly.
Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and the province of Ontario, they agreed among them they would reduce phosphorus pollution by 40% by 2025. And they'd reduce it at sort of a milestone, 20% by 2020.
Yvonne Lasico is Ohio Farm Bureau's Vice President of Public Policy, which represents farmers and agricultural interests at the state and federal levels.
There's a lot of voluntary measures that farmers are undertaking. And then in addition, there's voluntary measures and research and programs that those farmers' member organizations like Farm Bureau are undertaking. We've been working collectively, not just with other farm groups, but with environmental groups and conservation groups, and figuring out how do we create baselines and how do we determine what are these best management practices that we can help farmers incorporate on their farms.
these are the best management practices, but these are all voluntary based. Nobody's enforcing them. There is no regulatory mechanism saying, hey, you can't do this.
And so the voluntary measures are ones that farmers, usually on their own dime, are looking at and saying, this is something that will work for my farm. This is either going to reduce how much phosphorus I have to put on, which is a cost savings, and this is going to reduce then how much phosphorus is coming off.
But according to Jeff Reuter, phosphorus reduction in the Maumee River has not materialized. Will voluntary measures be enough?
We've been trying to do it up till this point entirely voluntarily. And we've been trying to do this now for 10 years. So here we are at the end of 2019. Not only can we not see any we see zero progress.
Sandy Bin is the executive director of Lake Erie Waterkeeper. Her group believes not enough focus has been put on CAFOs and their nutrient contribution to the watershed.
Commercial fertilizer phosphorus has gone down by 30 to 50% over the last 20 years. And we're looking at the data and the science and seeing that the number of animals in the watershed has increased substantially by about 40% from 2005 to 2018, with a comparable increase in the amount of manure and a comparable increase in the amount of phosphorus. So if on one side we're taking it out and we're adding it on the other, this lake is never going to recover.
So in terms of them being mostly voluntary measures, that's actually not really the case. There are a lot of regulated items out there, including if you're a concentrated animal feeding operation, you have to have a permit to install and a permit to operate on an ongoing basis.
While there are regulations governing CAFOs, other farms fall just below the threshold of CAFO designation and avoid regulations altogether.
To be designated as a CAFO, if you're a dairy operation, you have to have at least 700 cows. If you're a hog operation, you have to have at least 2,500 pigs. Chickens, you've got to have at least 1.25 million chickens. There are certain regulations that you have to comply with. So if you have 2,499 hogs rather than 2,500, then you can do whatever you want. You don't have to have a nutrient management plan in place to prevent you from spreading too much manure on your fields. You're simply not regulated if you're below that size.
If they take their manure off-site, called distribution and utilization, they don't have to tell us where it goes. They don't have to tell us how many acres. So there's a huge discrepancy in that.
The Environmental Law and Policy Center has been working to identify large farms within the Maumee watershed, which have escaped CAFO designation.
We can identify the barns through aerial imagery because they are very, very standardized. What you would see from the ground is very nondescript. They're sort of low-slung, long barns. You wouldn't recognize it as a big factory. They cram as many animals as they can into these barns. They prefabricate the facilities, which are automated to feed and water the animals, and then take the waste and put it either in underground storage or manure lagoons on the surface. The number of animals within these facilities has been increasing at the same rate that the dissolved reactive phosphorus has been increasing over the past 2 decades. CAFOs produce millions of gallons of liquid manure. And the fact that it's already liquid when it gets applied to fields means that it runs off easier during rainstorms, but it also means that it's more expensive to transport, which creates the siloing effect of the manure being applied to fields closer to the CAFO, which means that it accumulates nutrients in the soil.
On the manure side, where it's, you could put in the soil 150 parts per million of phosphorus. That's not what you need to grow a crop. You need 40 parts per million or less. That's what the commercial fertilizer people use as their guideline, if you will.
The problem is that our current guidelines allow too much manure to be applied, more than is needed for maximum crop production. So rather than fertilizing with the manure, really what we're doing is waste disposal.
If in fact it's to replace fertilizer, it should be having the same rules as fertilizer, and that's a huge effort that a lot of us are advocating for. And the response we get from meat and dairy is, you'll put us out of business, and no one wants to put them out of business.
Is it possible to reduce phosphorus levels to prevent algae blooms and have farmers make a living while producing our food? Chris Kurt is a corn and soybean farmer participating in a 5-year, $1 million nutrient mitigation project supported by the Ohio Farm Bureau and the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
I'll be honest, farmers don't always change easily. A lot of our farmers, they've done the same thing for a generation, and maybe it was passed on from the previous generation.
Think of it this way. I've been spreading my manure on this 100-acre plot here every year for the last 10 years. Suddenly, you're telling me that I now need to transport that manure a greater distance, and instead of spreading it on 100 acres, I need to spread it on 1,000 acres. That's going to cost more.
So if you ask a farmer, can they do more? And most of them are going to say, yes, tell me what to do. And then they're probably going to ask you, how am I going to pay for it? Because our margins are pretty thin as it is. So that funding issue is something that I think as a group, both farm and non-farm, we're probably going to have to work together to figure out.
How do we help them cover that cost of transporting the manure a greater distance and spreading the same amount of manure on a greater number of acres? They can do it voluntarily, we can give them incentives and disincentives, or we can create regulations to make them do it. Whatever we do, we're probably going to have to help them financially.
Joe Hammond is an organic dairy farmer who's been certified since 1997. He says the pressures on small farmers is immense to acquire more land and produce more per acre, and that as more farmers succumb to the pressures to grow bigger, maybe even to the CAFO level, the quality of the product and impacts to the environment will suffer.
Well, what we were talking about is the ability to vote through your dollar. If you're going to buy it from the cheapest discount place that just deals in quantity, you're going to support a farming system that's going to think in the same trail. You know, if you want to pay that extra dollar, there's a reason for that, because those farmers are spending more time, more effort, and more expensive inputs to get you a quality product.
If you are ready to pay for it and put the pressure on your food producer to produce the food in a cleaner way, you know, they have to change. It's both mutual, right? It's all about, you know, the cost and responsibility.
So that all comes right back out here to the field. What are they looking for and how do they want it raised? Fast and cheap, or do they want something with some quality?
The health of Lake Erie could hang in the balance.
At Great Lakes Now, we aim to cover the Great Lakes region and the people who live here, like you. Please follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our newsletter at greatlakesnow.org.